What is going on to all my WandaVision MCU fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with my weekly recap, breakdown, and review of the latest episode of Disney Plus WandaVision. We're talking episode 6, which was titled All New Halloween Spooktacular. And if we're following movie rules, this was the end of the second act, which means next week is the beginning of the third act, which I think is going to be insane madness of the multiverse. But so excited to break down this episode. So many Easter eggs, so many things to break down, and we will be doing that in the spoiler review. But before we dive into it, as you all can see on the screen now, make sure you're following me on all my other social media accounts, which you can find those links in the description below. If you are new to this channel, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing to the channel, and while you're at it, hit that notification bell. That way you all can get the alert from when I drop new content. It would mean the world to me if you all can like and share this review. It really helps out the channel, but I also appreciate all the support, and I do these reviews to talk to you all. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, your pros, your cons, your thoughts, your theories for the weeks ahead. Let's talk about Pedro. I mean, he knows what's going on. He's talking to Wanda about where the kids were hidden, you know, why he looks different. Agnes, good guy, bad guy. We got to talk about Vision and Hayward, keeping an eye on Vision. Again, I mentioned it. Ultron's out there somewhere, but also I think it's safe to say that Vision won't be making it out of Westview alive by the end of this season. But let's talk about it in the comments and have a great discussion about it. But before I get into the recap and breakdown, just a quick little plug. Every single week, every Saturday, 3 p.m. Central Time, myself and my amazing co-hosts Amanda and Chris, we host a live WandaVision discussion, breaking down the latest episode, but also talking about the latest news of the MCU, and we do it with special guests. And this week's special guest is, we'll have Sean Chandler from Sean Chandler Talks About, Kristen Mondanalo, as well as Zach from Intercut. It's going to be such a great time hearing their thoughts in the episode, hearing their theories, their, you know, what they hope to see in the weeks ahead. So I want to see you all in the live chat because it's such a great show, such a great discussion. Again, tomorrow, 3 p.m. Central Time. See you all there. So with that out of the way, let's get into this breakdown here. This episode was great. I've seen it only once now. I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite of the season thus far, but who knows, after multiple repeats and getting all the nuances, it might become my favorite. But I still love this episode. Evan Peters just fits like a glove. He's perfect in the MCU. Yes, I'm a fan of Aaron Taylor Johnson. Who knows if we'll see him in the future, but I think the conversation between Evan Peters and the acting of Elizabeth Olsen, their back and forth was fantastic. Those kids that play Billy and Tommy, I hope that we get to see them grow in the roles as far as Wicked and Speed. We know we have Stature in the mix with Ant-Man. We have Kate Bishop. We have Miss Marvel coming in the mix. We have a bunch of young Avengers, and I hope that we get to see these kids grow into the role because they were fantastic in this episode. And I really enjoyed the stuff that we got with Westview, especially the expansion of the Hex going into New Jersey. Multiverse of Madness is on its way. But I really enjoyed this episode, and I want to know what you all thought about it. But with that being out of the way, let's get into this recap here. As the episode opens up, we see that we are in the early 2000s because we get an homage to one of my favorite shows growing up, and that is Malcolm in the Middle. I will say one thing about Malcolm in the Middle. Bryan Cranston was the dad, right? And we know Evan Peters, we have X-Men in the universe, and we'll talk about him being a different version of Quicksilver of X-Men. But is it a coincidence that Malcolm in the Middle has Bryan Cranston as the dad, and there are fan casting of who's the next Professor X, Bryan Cranston, Professor X, I don't know, but something to keep in mind in that intro is we see Quicksilver, or I should say Pedro, running around. It's not the Quicksilver kind of breaking the speed barrier that we've seen in the X-Men universe. This is the MCU's version of how Quicksilver manipulates speed, which is very telling in regards to, again, the conversation that Evan Peters has with Elizabeth Olsen, which we'll be talking about. But something to keep in mind, this isn't the X-Men version that we've seen of Pedro as we talk about the moments here in a bit, but this is another alternate version of the character. But let me know your thoughts on that. But as I digress, we go into the episode. We see Billy and Tommy talking to the camera, breaking the fourth wall. If you all have seen Malcolm in the Middle, that's something that they do. But as we see Wanda coming down the stairs in her original costume from the comics, we get that from Vision, we get that from Quicksilver. I love those moments. I love that Easter egg. But she says, you know, I'm dressed up as a Sokovian fortune teller. And as Evan Peters says, oh, that's lame. You remember the time that our parents made costumes for us? And we see Wanda kind of having a bit of confusion, like, I don't remember it that way, as we see this flashback of them as kids, which, is it me or was Quicksilver dressed as Nick Fury in that moment? I thought that was kind of funny. I don't know what Wanda was dressed up in. Let me know in the comments, but it looked like Pedro was dressed up as Nick Fury's, or say Sam Jackson as Nick Fury. But anyway, we see Wanda again. She doesn't remember that memory that is his memory, which again explains this idea that this isn't the same version of the Quicksilver that we saw in the X-Men universe. This is another version of that mutant, which would explain a couple months ago, Jamie Foxx said that his version of Electro in Spider-Man 3 isn't the same Electro from Spider-Man, or I should say Amazing Spider-Man 2, which could explain us getting different versions of the character in the MCU. We know Kevin Feige likes to cast his own characters, he likes to tell his own stories. This is a kind of a side note here, but we're all assuming that when it comes to Spider-Man 3, and if the rumors are true that Tobey Maguire will be coming back as Spider-Man as well as Andrew Garfield, we're under the assumption that it's going to be the same Spider-Man that we saw in their movies. That might not be the case. They might be playing different versions of the characters. We see that with J. Jonah Jameson, with J.K. Simmons playing a different version of the character. Something to keep in mind with these alternate versions of the characters. But going back to that moment, we see Pedro says to her, well, you probably don't remember that incident because, you're suppressing your trauma. Again, he's very aware of what Wanda's up to, which is very telling, especially in the conversation they have a little bit later in the episode. But as we see Vision comes down wearing his costume from the comics, he mentions that he'll be doing his neighborly duties, doing his neighborhood watch. He's not going to be hanging out with the kids, which Wanda immediately, again, we see as the decades go further and we get closer to the timeline of the MCU, Vision is breaking out of this hex or breaking out of this trance that he's in of Wanda. He's breaking the rules. Wanda's like, well, you're not supposed to. He's like, what? Like, what am I not supposed to do, Wanda? Not supposed to take your, have free will. So again, it's very interesting to see Vision breaking out of this particular hex. And it's very interesting. I don't know if I'm stretching here, but I don't know if you all noticed, but when Vision was talking about like toilet paper, he like made an X-Men sign. I don't know. That might have been a coincidence that his hands went in that way. But we see Quicksilver will be playing the fatherly figure, the cool uncle in this episode. He will be taking Billy and Tommy to go trick-or-treating, but also again we see that he has this comic book accurate look with his hair and everything. I thought it was fantastic. But cut to catching up with Monica, we see Jimmy Woo and Dorsey. They have a conflict with Hayward, who, again, I can't trust that MFer. I think he's up to no good, as we see that he is talking about, you were one of obviously Monica Rambeau, she wants to protect Wanda. She has a connection with Wanda. She wants to look out for her best interests. And we see that she wasn't a fan of his silly-ass decision to try to explode Wanda. Like, come on, man, you know who you're messing with in this matter. But really interesting choice of words that Hayward says in this scene. As he says to Monica Rambeau, we have to take her out and get him out of this nightmare situation. Again, we're all assuming that Mephisto is behind all this, but I mentioned a couple weeks ago, who's to say it's not only Mephisto, but also the nightmarish character Nightmare that is a big foe of Doctor Strange, but also manipulates people's minds and reality. So they could be fighting for the twins. So I still think that Nightmare may be in the runnings, but either way, we see Hayward bring up the sympathy that Monica has for the situation. He even says, like, you're only kind of having this sympathetic way because you were gone for 5 years in a blip. You don't know what it was like with us out here where you were gone, which is somewhat of a good point. But also he mentions that you have a relationship and you have a history with a superpowered person, Captain Marvel, as we know. And again, we know that there's going to be some tension there when we eventually see them, and who knows if Carol Danvers will make her way into this TV show, but I know we're going to definitely explore that when we go to Captain Marvel 2, which, speaking of Captain Marvel 2, Hayward mentions Marie's death and cuts so deep. It says you couldn't handle the death of your mom. That's a low blow from Hayward. Again, that's a pretty jerkish move by that guy. Again, I think he's up to no good. As we kind of cut to, we see that he wants Monica, he wants Wu, he wants Dorsey off of the premises. We see that, people have kind of been coming on Wu, like, what's the purpose of this character? He doesn't really do anything. Well, he kicks some ass this week, as well as Monica, as they take out the guards and they go into do their own kind of situation here. As we cut back to Westview, we see Pedro mention something about the kids. He says to them, he yells to them, unleash Hell Demon Spawn Kids, which is very interesting that he says Hell Demon Spawn Kids. Reminded me a lot of the Olsen, I should say the Ullman twins, in regards to Mephisto or Nightmare wants these kids to age up for he can use them for their abilities, something to keep in mind. But we go back into Wanda testing Pedro's knowledge as she talks about a kid that they knew when they were younger, but she mentions, why do you look different? And he says, I don't really know why I look different. All I remember is being shot in the streets and knowing that you needed me. So again, that is a big sign that this isn't, again, the X-Men version of Evan Peters' Quicksilver. This is someone else that has somehow use his face, his lookings, his powers that we see in the MCU, but it's a different looking version of Quicksilver. It's very interesting how they're going to explain this whole situation, why he looks different, why is this version of Quicksilver in Evan Peters' version of the story. He might have had a similar situation play out in regards to him dying in the universe, him and that version of Wanda having a different growing up, but it's not the version that Wanda knows. So again, I can't wait until they explain why we get this version of Quicksilver, which also a really cool little Easter egg, as the kids say, or they say something about like Kick-Ass, which if you all don't remember who was in Kick-Ass, not only was it Aaron Taylor Johnson, but also Evan Peters. So again, I don't think that it was a throwaway line. I think that was a nice little Easter egg acknowledging that we have two actors that have played the same character. As we move forward, we see Herb informs Wanda that Vision isn't doing nightly duties tonight. He's not doing his neighborhood watch, but he's, he hasn't checked in, but Herb, man, he is someone that also breaks out of this reality. He says to her, "What's wrong, Wanda? Do you want me to do something different? Do you want to change things?" Why would Herb say that? He said that a couple weeks ago in regards to cutting through the brick and wanting to tell Vision that something's not right here. Who's Herb, ladies and gentlemen? Is he someone that might be in on this in regards to a villain, someone that might have the same type of abilities that Agnes has? Let me know your thoughts and theories. Also, the idea of him dressed up as a Frankenstein character, which Frankenstein was someone that died that was brought back to life. Is Herb dead? Is he the Grim Reaper that a lot of people have been theorizing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments on all of that. But cut to Vision noticing that there's a woman that's glitching out, but she's crying at the same time. And we see that we cut to this week's commercial. But before we go to the commercial, again, we learned this episode that when they go out to the further Wanda is away from the people in town, or I should say the people in town, the further away they are from Wanda's family, they're not functioning properly. And this ties directly into this week's commercial, which isn't necessarily tied to Wanda's trauma, but we get this claymation commercial in regards to, it's called Yo Magic, and it's a shark who snacks on the survivors, and in particular that shark snacks on their magic. So again, if I am to dive deeper into the commercial, again, and not necessarily tying to Wanda's trauma, her past, but that shark might be the villain, not the shark. This is just a manifestation of the villain. But that particular story that they're trying to tell us in this commercial, that shark is feeding off of the people of the town, feeding off of their soul, Mephisto, feeding off of their fears, Nightmare, feeding off of their magic. So really interesting bit of news there. Let me know your thoughts and theories of this week's commercial. I think it's very pivotal that it was a kid that couldn't eat. Again, we see from the scene before, Vision seeing the woman crying. These people aren't eating. They might be dying inside. But again, Mephisto, Nightmare, fighting for these souls, fighting for the magic of Speed and Wiccan. Let me know your thoughts on all of that there. Cut to Pedro talking about the reason why he came into town. He came in unexpectedly, creating tension between his brother-in-law to stir up some things with the kids, but also addressing the grief that Wanda's going through, that Wanda brought him into the mix. She can't bring back people from dead, as she mentioned last week, but she can kind of bring in an alternate version of a character that played someone else's brother in another world and bring him into the equation. That is very possible because she is a very powerful witch. We're seeing Wanda transform into the Scarlet Witch, and this episode really shows that and shows her abilities. As she mentions, well, why is your accent gone? We see that he asks her the same thing, and again he goes back to saying he remembers getting shot in the street and hearing her call his name, and that's what brought him into the mix. Again, she has these abilities that can pull people from different multiple universes, from a multiverse. Again, she is so powerful in the MCU, and I can't wait to see how this transition of maybe seeing Scarlet Witch taking over Wanda and not necessarily being a quote-unquote villain, but we can see where the origins of her pain and her trauma comes from. So I'm really intrigued to see how they handle that story. We get a really big moment here as Billy discovers his speed ability, as we see that she says to the kids, don't go past Ellis Avenue, which we see Vision do a little bit later. But more importantly, again, we see the kids getting their abilities, and we'll talk about Tommy's abilities here in a bit. But cut to our crew outside of Westview. We see that Hayward didn't share everything about what he's figured out as he's tracking Vision. This goes back to what I mentioned it was last week actually, when we got that cutscene of Wanda taking Vision out of the sword facility, the secret facility. I said it in that review. I think they're trying to bring back Ultron and put it into Vision's body, or taken out of Vision's body. Because again, there's a piece of not only Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, but also Ultron. I think they're trying to bring him back, and that's why they're following Vision. Because again, remember what SWORD stands for. They're all about weaponizing things, and they want to weaponize Vision and make him to the Ultron. That's my theory. It could go another way, but I think it's very interesting that they mentioned that there. But also we see that the people at the edge of town, they're barely moving. Again, it goes back to the commercial, which we cut back to Vision running into those people at the edge of the town. They're frozen as Vision turns back into his MCU costume. He overlooks the town and he notices a car by a stop sign. We see it's Agnes. She's dressed in the witch. And I want to address, I mentioned it when I gave you all the breakdown of who Agatha Harkness, which we're assuming that she's playing that character. She's not necessarily a villain, and I've mentioned it several times in our live streams. This show is about misunderstood characters. Wanda's misunderstood, Vision's misunderstood, Tommy and Billy, this version of Quicksilver, but as well as Agnes, and maybe even if it is Mephisto, if it is Nightmare, they have their own reasons of why they're doing what they're doing, but it's all about perspective. And in the comics, Agatha Harkness isn't necessarily your traditional villain. Yeah, she has some villainous ways, but there are moments in the comics where her and Wanda are allies. They're foes at times, but she's not, like I said, a traditional villain that's always about like evil things. So she could, again, be Agatha Harkness, and she could be manipulated herself, because it's very telling in this moment as she's talking to Vision, and we've seen this in a trailer. She says, "Oh my goodness, you're an Avenger. You're Vision. Am I dead?" And Vision says, "No, why would you say that? Because you're dead, Vision." She says it several times, which obviously throws Vision off and upsets him, and he puts her back in the trance. But again, seeing that moment with Agnes, she is under some type of, not necessarily, Wanda spell, but whoever the big bad is, she's under their hex. Again, we haven't seen Dottie in a couple weeks. Where the heck is Dottie? Let me know your thoughts on that. Again, I think that, if rumors are to be said, true about Mephisto and Nightmare, I'm thinking that's where Dottie's all about. We go back to Monica. She gets the message from her guy that she's going to meet on the bridge. I hope we meet that character next week. A lot of us are theorizing that it's Reed Richards. She says it's a guy, so I think we can take out Riri Williams. I think we can take out like a female character, and it is a guy. Could be, again, introduction to Fantastic Four, you name it. Let me know again who your thoughts and theories are, who this guy might be. But cut to Dorsey telling Monica that her cells have been altered because of going into Westview, which is huge in what we get at the end of this episode. But she is now developing her powers. We see Dorothy is going to be hanging back to learn more about the secrets of what Hayward is doing. Cut to Pedro asking an important question: "Where were you hiding the kids, Wanda?" As she acknowledges, like, "You don't think it's bad?" He's like, "No, I don't think it's bad. You're my sister, this, that, and the other. I'm very impressed by what you're doing here." And she says that she really doesn't remember. All she remembers is feeling emptiness and feeling loneliness, which goes back to those that have read The House of M. She loses a lot in the comics. She has a mental breakdown, and we're witnessing this, the version of that in the MCU, as she's lost everything at this point, right? So cutting back to, we get a dark moment. Again, this show is PG. No, it is not. It is TV-14. We see Wanda look at Pedro as he is the dead version of her brother. There's bullet holes in his chest, and there's blood on his chest. Again, MCU is getting dark, and I'm loving it. I'm a big horror fan. This is a Halloween episode, and it wasn't scary. I'm desensitized to like scary things, but I have to acknowledge there were some good kind of creepy moments in this episode as we go back to Vision as he's trying to make his way out of Westview. He's going out of the portal, and we see him saying, help me, and it's pulling him back in. He cannot survive unless he's under this spell, this hex, this controlled environment that Wanda's in control of. So I don't think we're going to see Vision making it out of this show, but very interesting enough, we already saw Billy get his abilities. Now we see Tommy using his abilities. He hears that Vision's in trouble. He tells his mom, and this was such a badass moment. And again, we're seeing Wanda transform into the Scarlet Witch. She freezes everything, closes her eyes, and she expands Westview. We see that the Westview is now making its way into the camp of S.W.O.R.D. Things are becoming, we're seeing clowns, we're seeing a circus. We see Dorsey is brought into the mix. Is Dorsey going to have some type of abilities? She doesn't have any, I don't think she's a comic book character, but it'll be really interesting to see what comes of that. We see that once this is expanding, the theories come into place. How are we going to get into the multiverse of madness? Well, Wanda expanding this outside of New Jersey, outside of other states, outside of the world, could explain different versions of the characters, could explain the X-Men gene being ignited in certain people like Monica Rambeau, maybe like Dorsey, maybe other characters that come into the MCU. So much to break down, but in my notes, I wrote down the creation of the multiverse. Pedro's in on everything. The Hex rewrites people's inside cells. Agnes is a witch, but is she a good guy or bad guy? The boundaries of Wanda's powers. Sword creating Ultron. The twins are having their powers now. Vision can't live outside of Westview. And Yo Magic snacking on magic. Mephisto, Nightmare, you name it. Let's talk about it in the comments again. We'll be back tomorrow diving even deeper in this episode. 3 p.m. Central Time. Myself, Chris, Amanda, Sean, Kristen, as well as Zach will be breaking it all down, as well as talking about the latest MCU news for the week. So tune in tomorrow, 3 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all for watching this review. Make sure to like the video, share the video. Again, your thoughts and theories in the comments. Hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. That way you can get the alert when I drop new content. Have a great day. Hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you in the next video.